Alright, today we're starting with what is game design, which to me is establishing the player experience. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this presentation. We're coming from the top down. Hopefully this will get the team on the same page as well as explain to everyone the processes we're using, and knowing this will help you understand a lot of what we're doing on this project. So what is game design? Unfortunately, if you ask a bunch of different people, you're going to get a bunch of different answers. Whether they're players or people in industry or designers themselves, no one's really quite sure. And what this amounts to is, we kind of have to follow around all the experts or people who have a lot of experience, and especially those who have examples of good work. That's about where we're at in the industry. So who am I to teach it? I'm Josh Long. I worked 6 years at Relic Entertainment, 1 year at Blackbird Interactive. And in my 8th year, I certainly don't know everything, but I do have a fair bit of runway in this career so far. And a lot of that has included discussion time and mentorship from some pretty good designers who've worked on some famous titles. But in the end, should you believe me, that's not necessarily what I'm asking in this presentation. I think we've established that there's a lack of convention as far as how to properly game design. Every studio and designer right now does it a little bit differently, and I'm simply going to share my experiences and my paradigm as to how I approach game design, and you can glean from it what you will in order to increment your own designer toolbox. So, the player experience. When I was learning about this a few years ago, we tried to use a pretty simple definition, which amounts to ideas like, what is a player seeing, what do they hear, how do they feel. These all seem pretty basic, but then you get into other aspects of the player experience, like what are they thinking about, or what are they doing. And when you look at something like that pair, you'll notice through experience that what a player is doing isn't necessarily what they're thinking about, and that we need to be conscious about all of these if we want to craft effective player experiences. So how do we go about it? My first piece of advice is going to be don't populate your game randomly. That if you're going to put something in, be conscious about it and say, how is this, whether it's a piece of art or a tweak to gameplay or an audio clip, how is that going to affect the experience? And the much more difficult part is to actually measure that piece that you're inserting into the scene and say, how is this interacting with all of those other pieces, and how does that affect how they're able to convey experience? That I might put in asset A, which makes a player feel happy, and asset B, which in a vacuum would also make a player feel happy, but maybe combined they don't quite generate a result in unison. So the short of it is, just to start, have a clear purpose when you're putting something into the game. This isn't to say you shouldn't put things into the game that you don't or that you like, but at the same time, think about how that fits into the experience and why you like it. Game design is pretty difficult. I mean, I know the end product is very fun, and that's our experience as players, but changing that perspective is difficult, and it begins with something that seems like an advantage, and of course, in a lot of cases, is certainly so, but designers being gamers, it's not really giving us the correct perspective. That player and designer perspectives are actually very different, and that while you might be able to leverage the resources from having played other games, thinking about a game like a designer is very different than thinking about a game as a player. So to that end, don't always put in something because you think it's good. You need to think about it a little bit, and that's some of what I'm going to talk about in the next few slides. So what is my process? This process is called using intention. I was taught it by a very wise design director, and it wasn't easy. It took me a good 9 to 12 months to figure out exactly how to use this process. Anyways, so your first goal is to set a target player experience. This is what they're seeing, what they're feeling, what they hear, all that stuff. Set goals, concrete goals, write them down. And you need to aim all the elements of your game and their relationships at that target experience. Sounds really simple. It's actually quite difficult. Part of what's going to happen in development is you're going to need to reset the target. You're going to set it, and maybe you're going to meet it, and when you play it, it's not going to be what you want. But having a target, even if it's not the correct target, will give people motivation and clarity. Motivation because their work can be validated and can be concrete, which is very difficult in creative fields. And clarity, they know what to aim for exactly. This is a very difficult process, especially when you're first starting your career, not just in games, but any endeavor. The temptation is to always worry about whether or not you're putting 100% into something that's final. And being a professional in the industry and doing a good job, especially as part of a team where you need to be professional, putting in your full effort towards a goal, even if you're not exactly sure where that's going to take you, is part and parcel with good process. I like to think of it a bit like navigating a maze, where we can set our target to turn left. If that takes us to a dead end, then we go back to where we started and we turn right. Whereas, flailing about and trying random stuff, certainly that's going to get it right sometimes. That's a lot of the early exploration of how to design games, was just trying random things. The problem is when you don't have a process and you're not using anything you can measure, progress is going to be really slow, both in development of games and development of game design. And to that end, intention is unintuitive, as I said. A lot of what I'm talking about on paper might seem obvious, but in practice, it's very difficult to adapt to, especially because you need to unlearn a lot of processes that come from only being a player of games as opposed to a designer.